One of the things that I enjoy the most is the time that I spend with all these great directors.
Hi, and welcome back to StudioBinder Academy. I'm Brandon. Today we're speaking with editor Jin-mo Yang, whose work includes Train to Busan, Okja, Parasite, and most recently Mickey 17. Jin-mo, thanks so much for talking with me today.
My pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's a real honor. We're big fans of your work, so it's a real pleasure to speak with you.
Pleasure is all mine as well, and I hope this interview will be interesting on both ends.
Oh, I'm sure it will be. So we like to get started with everyone's background, how you got started and what inspired you to pursue a career in the film industry.
Actually, I went to college in the United States called Bard College. It was a small private school. Originally, I planned to study painting in that college, but somehow my life led to film. I don't know if this was destiny for me, but one of my acquaintances actually knew director Bong, and at that time, I had a chance to read the script of Memories of Murder. So I read this script even before the movie was on theater, and at the time I read it, I just felt destined maybe I should do film. So at that time, my idea of pursuing film as a career was a brief idea, but at the time of my graduation, I had a chance to work in a small independent film called Palindrome. So the director was Todd Solondz. So I had a chance to work in that film project as a sound intern, which was a small role. So that was my first participation in a feature film. After that, I coincidentally encountered a Korean director in New York, and through his introduction to other director, I had a chance to return to Korea and participate in a film called The Duelist. But at that time, the director for Duelist was actually one of the most famous directors in Korea called Myung-se Lee, who also directed an action film called Nowhere to Hide. Actually, there's an action sequence in Nowhere to Hide, a slow-mo action moment, and actually the movie Matrix homaged that moment from this film. So at that time, I wanted to direct, actually, and I wanted to join the directing department, but at that time, that was unable. So I wondered, what could I do in a film project like this? And at that time, I got the opportunity to work as an on-set editor. And after that, I worked crazily as an on-site editor for almost 10 years. While I was working as an on-site editor, I only had one straight goal in my mind: to work with great Korean directors by their side and steal their directing skills, and maybe I could use that later to direct my own film. But the reality was sort of different at that time. So my life led to this and that, and somehow I ended up creating this beautiful editing, which we're currently positioned at. The directors I worked as on-site editor actually became my partners, and that's how I became editor. And one of those great directors was director Bong Joon Ho.
Could you, for our audience, explain, is there a difference between an on-site editor and a regular editor and what those differences are?
So on-set editor literally is a person who is on set, and he even shares the monitor with the director and sits next to him. So he does real-time editing on site. So in most productions in Korea, this on-site editing is utilized the budget as efficient as possible. So because we don't have that large budget like Hollywood films, we try to make our film as complete as possible in the most effective way.
Right. So instead of the traditional American process where you shoot one day and then maybe later that night or the next day you get to see what you shot, but it's not even edited. But here you're shooting and editing concurrently, so you get to see exactly what that scene might look like later on.
So of course, the on-site editing will be different from the final edited version. But because we have that live editing on site, it's more beneficial and desirable for us to connect each scenes. And it feels like that is quite enough to judge at that moment.
And do you typically become the final editor as well, or is that usually another person?
So normally he would only do on-site editing, and final edit would be done by a different person.
Okay. And just a general question, what do you like about editing?
Of course, when the footage of the film is completely ruined, it's impossible for me to transform that into a great film. But if that a film footage or that film project has some extent of completion rate or it's good in some level, then I can somehow arrange it in a different way and forge it into something that's much cooler. Of course, I like on-site editing and I love being the final editor of the film. But back in the days, I thought I would be able to do all of these things by myself. And I also thought that I would be able to create good results by doing all of those by myself. But now my thoughts have changed. Now I love cooperating with a lot of different people. I love building great relationship with them, and I really love being in this cooperative relationship. One of the things that I enjoy the most is the time that I spend with all these great directors.
Okay. All right. And what's your ideal collaboration process with the director? In other words, how do you like to work?
Mickey 17 was the closest experience I had to my ideal cooperative process. After I became the editor, we have some realistic obstacles because in Korea, because of small and insufficient budget, it's really difficult for me to concentrate on one film project at the time. So if I were to only focus on one project at a time, it would be difficult for me to maintain this editing company, and I would literally be broke. For Mickey 17, because we had sufficient budget, I was also involved during the pre-production, and even in the post-production, I was allowed to only concentrate on this film project. So the environment allowed me to work with the director throughout that long time period. When I was working as an editor in Korea, that was my dream to focus only on one project. So from pre-production to production and to post-production, I would be able to work with the director really closely. And after having a lot of discussion and these on-site, I could have another discussion and rearrange those footage in the post-production in the editing room and assemble them again. So that was actually one of my goals as a film maker, to be involved in that project from the beginning to the end. So in that vein, Mickey 17 meant a lot to me, and it was almost like a dream project to me.
That's really great. And I'm really happy that you finally got to that stage. And I'm curious, what do you typically do in pre-production? Because most people understand that editors, they might be on set, but most of their work is done in post-production. So typically, what do you like to do in pre-production?
I don't have a big role in the pre-production, but for Mickey 17, before the production started, we had a session with the director where we would read out the script. During that time, we had the sound team on those rooms and recorded all of the Robert Pattinson's voiceovers. And we also used that material while we were editing on site as well.
I should have got snapped in half and died on the way down, instead of slowly turning into a meat popsicle.
Considering all of these, I feel like editor could be a lot of help in the production when she's included in the pre-production as well. So because I re-recorded all of those script reading, I used all of those materials and just threw them in the editing tool. And because of that process, we could gauge the duration of the film even before we shoot the actual film. And we also use storyboards or some footages of the actors acting out in that reading session. And I would just blend all of those in the editing tool. So of course we would have different visual as an end product, but we were able to gauge the whole duration or the feel of the film even before the production started.
It's an efficient process, like you're saying, it makes, everything in production smoother and much more efficient. But it also gives you more time to be creative with how you're assembling the film, rather than being stuck in post-production with, what's there. You get to kind of refine it at every stage.
Considering the size of Korean film market and its budget size, which would be similar to United States America's independent film, I feel like on-site editing could be really helpful in terms of producing those films. And we also have a lot of great film schools in America as well. And I feel like if the students could practice on-site editing, it would also become really helpful to them in the future.
Right. I'm sure it makes the post-production phase shorter, which, post-production is an expensive phase of the whole film production process. So maybe you're taking some of that money that would have gone to post-production, but applying it to pre-production and kind of streamlining the process. just making it more efficient. I mean, I'm convinced. I think you're really onto something, and we should probably all be doing it this way.
I actually had a goal to try this out first time in America as well. And I had an experience in the past with an American film called The Last Stand, which stars Arnold Schwarzenegger. And the director for that film was actually Kim Ji-hoon, who is one of the famous directors in Korea. And I was fortunate enough to join that project and work as an on-site editor for that project. But at that time, I felt disappointed and lost because of the American film system. I was unable to receive the editor's credit. And my credit for that project was actually quite weird. I was probably marked as director's assistant. But actually, all of this changed thanks to the Parasite.
In what way did it change?
Because I was able to receive the editor's credit for the Parasite, and I also received a renowned reward by the America's editors. If you come to think about it, I was unable to receive even a credit for Last Stand as an editor, but everything changed because of Parasite.
Excellent. So in Train to Busan, which amazing film, I love it. I'm curious. The tempo and the momentum of that movie is really intense, but it never seems like it's too much. How do you go about managing, that momentum and that tempo for a long period? What are some of the things you think about to try and not make it too much for the viewer?
So for director Yeon Sang-ho, he had a lot of strength coming from the animation background, and one of them is the tempo. He has this unique tempo even in the storyboard or even in the previs, and he has a lot of cartoonish angle in those storyboards or previs. And I myself also really love animation as well, and I have similar taste with director Yeon Sang-ho, and we got along well together, and maybe that's because we had a great chemistry. And
Yeah.
on site, I actually played the original soundtrack of Last of Us, which is the
Ah,
video game, and I used that as a reference really a lot in the production. And between me and director Yeon Sang-ho, we would have these conversations. Did you have a chance to play the game? The action is crazy. It's one of the best games of the year, and the zombies in that game was really great as well. While we were talking about that, we had an idea to actually embody those elements into live action film.
wow, that's great. That's really interesting. Now, in Parasite, there's some pretty significant changes in tone. At some points, it's a comedy, at some points, it's a thriller, and at some points, it's a drama. I'm curious, how do you go about managing the changes in tone for those specific sections? And then how do you go about segueing between those sections from an editorial standpoint?
So maybe this is a Korean film tone and manner thing or genre. Actually, Parasite is not the first to shift between these drastic changes between genres or tones. There are a lot of Korean films where it would feel like a black comedy, and then the right next moment it suddenly turns into thriller. This is especially showcased a lot of the black comedy films. So it was suddenly
Ah,
turned into a really cruel or brutal scene right
mhm.
after the scene is really funny or it feels like a comedy. And director Bong's film has a lot of these interesting shifts, especially for instance, like the film Mother or The Memories of Murder. So I don't have any specific standard or yardstick when I'm doing editing. For instance, oh, I should turn into thriller at this moment, or maybe I should take into account that this comedy would have to turn into a serious scene at this point. I don't have those things in mind. So when I'm editing these scenes, what's important to me is not the shift in tone. It's rather how the characters react in those scenes, whether they have consistency is the important element. Of course, the characters wouldn't somehow turn drastically into something that wouldn't normally be. I wouldn't have those moments. I just try to be careful to not have those moments.
Sure. I see. That's interesting. So maybe the shifting is happening at the script level and maybe how director Bong films it, and your job is to kind of keep it consistent throughout, where the shifts, we don't necessarily feel the shifts, or they're not as drastic, and you're kind of keeping it one cohesive piece and leaving the tonal changes on the script and performance level.
So when I'm doing the editing, I try to focus on these shifting moments. I try to underline or emphasize these moments as much as possible, and this is especially the case for the Parasite. So when I was working with director Bong, we used to use this expression that we really have to run towards the end, especially for the latter part of the film. We really have to rush people and make them immersed in the film. So when I'm doing the editing with the director, we have a lot of conversation about whether the shot is actually essential to the film. So if we feel that it's unnecessary, we take them all out. So when I was editing Parasite, director and I would talk. Of course, we wouldn't count all the shots, but we would normally talk. Are we over 1,000 or not? So I feel like for Parasite, we're around 900 cuts. But this standard or this promise with the director actually got broken when we were working on Mickey 17. So I had a chance to count all the shots in the film, and it was actually over 1,000 cuts.
Wow, that's a lot of cuts. Now, do you have any examples of a scene or a moment from any of your films where in post-production it just wasn't working? Maybe you had been on set, done some pre-editing, and it was kind of all set, but it wasn't until you got into post-production that you found it just didn't work, and you had to cut it from the film. Do you have any examples of anything like that?
So there's a Korean film called Poison War, Okja. So the film is actually about drugs, and it's an action film, and it travels a lot of locations. But when I was editing, no matter how hard I tried, when I considered the structure or the framework of the story, the cinematography seemed a bit flat. And towards the end of the film, our main character hunts down this criminal, and he suddenly goes to Norway, I believe. And I felt like there was no connection for that transition. Why would he suddenly travel to Norway? So I completely changed the order of the shot and told the director that it would be better for us to have the Norway scene at the beginning of the film. So there's a shot where the main character is at a gas station putting in gas to his car, and I just made that cut to be moved to the beginning of the film to make the audience curious. And the film would be about why would he travel to Norway? And as we move closer to the ending of the film, we return back to Norway, and that's when the connection is made. Personally, I feel like one of the most important goals as a filmmaker is to make the audience feel curious about next scene, what's going to happen next. So when I feel like the structure of the film is slightly flat or simple, I try to somehow I even veer from the original script and change some of the framework or the structure of the film in the editing so that the audience feels more comfortable in understanding the story of the film.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Now, in Mickey 17, there's a very unexpected musical score. There's a lot of classical piano in what would typically be, a traditional blockbuster sci-fi film. How was it editing with that music in mind? Well, first of all, did you have temp music, or did you know what the final score was going to sound like? And what was it like editing with that music in mind?
Actually, I use a lot of temp music when I edit, especially when I'm doing on-site editing. So Mickey 17, we have that important montage sequence when Mickey is constantly being printed out from that copying machine or the printer. So when I was editing the monster sequence, I always try to put in some type of music, even if it's temporary. It could be something I personally like, or because I've worked so much with the director, now I know what he would actually like. So I try to use those type of music as a temporary version for the version when I'm editing. When I'm shooting and working as an on-site editor, I try to have this temporary music beforehand. For instance, when I was shooting Mickey 17, maybe in some cases I would ask my assistant to prepare some of the classic scores before I go on set. And with those preparations, I have these ingredients when I'm actually at the scene. So I use a lot of these prepared scores when I'm editing on site. I had a funny incident. So when I was working with the temp music and editing, even if I knew that our genius music director Chung Jae-il would compose original scores and deliver them back to me, the temp music I used in the montage sequence, actually, I was really satisfied and content with the music that I've chosen. But when I was parking my car in front of my house, I heard this temp music come out from the parking lot, and I changed the music the day right after.
That's amazing. Now we have one more question for you. What was the most difficult challenge on Mickey 17, and how did you come about the solution?
The most difficult moment for me as an editor was probably when a Mickey 18 first discovers 17. So on site, our actor Robert had to act 17 and 18 twice. But in order to ensure that this works, director requested that I composite the two shots on site so that he feels secured and safe to move on to the next shots. So once the shooting was done for both 17 and 18, all of the staff on set was just waiting for me to finish the composite on site. And I was really nervous whether this would work or not. I feel like that was one of the most difficult moments for this was when 18 first discovers 17 and throws a dumbbell at 17. So we really wanted to match the timing for that shot. So I just tried to make a rough composite for that shot, and then somehow worked, luckily.
Now, one last thing. Do you have any advice for someone that's looking to become an editor? Maybe something that you would have said to yourself if you were able to go back when you were first getting started.
So I feel like watching a lot of film is the most important key element, and you just gotta try editing somehow. This is probably an advice to students in film school or people who's just starting out. Maybe it's also for editing assistant or editors, but I feel like what's most important is the mindset. And I also feel that the relationship between the people you work with is the most important element. So I would always think to myself, how would I cut this if I were the director to this film? Would I extend it, or would I cut it shorter? If I were to put myself in the director's shoe, I have a much clearer and better understanding of the decisions that I would like to make. So for me, I started out as an aspiring director, and of course, my life somehow led me to become a great editor, but I always had the same mindset. If this was my film, how would I cut it?
So you're thinking like a director in general, but also at the same time, like this director specifically. You understand their mind, so you're kind of editing from their POV.
Of course, the bottom of the baseline, we always have to consider the audience, whether they would like it, whether they will find this interesting or not. So if I recall to some of the film that was not very successful, I would say that it's somehow connected to authorism of the creators. Because a lot of the times audiences does not care, but it's really important for the creators of the films to have these in the film, and they always insist on having that. But if you consider the audience as the base, it might not be the most important thing that you might want to include.
Considering the audience's expectations or desires, or what they're looking for, maybe sometimes is more important than what you and or the director are going for.
When I'm working with the directors, this is probably the biggest dilemma I have. We like it, but what if the audience doesn't? Is our biggest question. But to our eyes, that scene is the most beautiful shot. It's just our favorite. What should we do with it? Yeah, as an editor, that's the biggest dilemma I have.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, you're balancing, what the script is and what the director shot, all of these creatives and what they want to present. But you're balancing that with, how is that going to translate to the audience? I mean, it's a tightrope for sure.
Yeah, that is true. And Parasite is actually, we can even say that it's a miracle of considering how it worked out.
I mean, it's such an amazing film. You really pulled it off. So thank you for your work, and thank you for your time today and answering our questions. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you today, Jin-mo.
Thank you. Pleasure meeting you. Talk to you soon.
For more interviews or deep dives into the StudioBinder software, like and subscribe to be notified when new videos are added. I'm Brandon with StudioBinder Academy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.